Welcome to the Martech Podcast. I'm your host, Benjamin Shapiro, and today we're going to be talking about why your B2B media strategy is dead on arrival. Joining me is Jeff Culliton, who is the executive producer of the CMO Confidential Podcast. Jeff, welcome to the Martech Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ben, as always.
Always good to see you, buddy. Excited to have you here. Excited to do more testing and iteration as we're figuring out all these things around live streams and new media and everything beyond just kind of what we've been doing for the last couple of years, just podcasts. But let's start off with a fun little game I like to call elevator pitch. Jeff, let's just pretend for a second here that you and me are getting in an elevator. We're in New York City. We're going up to the 37th floor of a building. We don't have too much time. I'm going to press the button. Bing. Give me your elevator pitch. Tell me who you are and what you do.
Longtime agency executive in the media realm. Now I'm the executive producer and partner of CMO Confidential, which has turned out to be a top 10 marketing podcast in the country. Also a very active startup advisor as well. So happy to be here.
Excited to have you on the show. Jeff, today we're going to go over a couple different topics. We're going to talk about whether B2B podcasts work, and we're going to try to define this thing we've been calling a media brand. Are you ready to get into the meat of the subject? You ready to get going?
I've never been more ready.
All right, here we go. Look at this. Topic number one. Do B2B podcasts work? Looks like we misspelled podcasts, but that's okay. All right. So, Jeff, do B2B podcasts? Hey, look, again, we're trying new things here. Do B2B podcasts work? We're going to start off with a couple little segments, little skits we have. The first one is going to be called Buy or Sell. So, Jeff, you're doing B2B podcasts now. I think I might know your answer, but tell me, are you buying or selling podcasts for B2B?
Well, I'm a buyer. I'm long on podcast. I left my career in agency world because I'm long on podcasts. Especially in the B2B world where I think we're now seeing B2B marketing starting to mirror B2C marketing in some ways. I think B2B brands are starting to take their brands more seriously and their marketing more seriously. So I'm very long on podcast, long form content creation. And everything that means for brands moving forward, especially in the B2B realm.
All right, I'm going to hop in here for a second because we might actually have a differentiation of opinion. In other words,
doesn't sound like us.
Hey, I disagree. And I'm trying to be a little controversial here, but I've been saying it on live streams and shouting it from podcasts alone. B2B podcasts don't work. Asterisk. Look, I've been a B2B podcaster for 7 years. So I think that the asterisks center around what your goals are and what your timeline is. If you build a B2B podcast with tens of thousands of followers and you've got a reputation and a niche, yes, that powerful content can really make a difference for your business. But it takes time, effort, patience, marketing, budget, all of the things to try to cultivate a channel which is inherently kind of one directional, where we talk and you listen. And so to me, when I'm thinking about B2B podcasts, I'm thinking audio only podcasts.
Yeah.
And right now, if I'm a B2B buyer, I'm not sure if an audio only podcast is really the direction that I'd go. All right, Jeff. Now we're going to go into our second topic here. We're going to do something that we like to call marketing mythbusters. Here you go, Jeff. The marketing myth that I'd like you to bust, or don't, is whether all brands are media brands.
Okay. I think this, I'm busting this myth because I think there's a tremendous number of brands out there that inherently aren't media brands. I think the brands that are ultimately going to succeed and are ones that are looking at the market as something that they have to cultivate an audience and a community, those are the ones that are media brands. But there's a tremendous number of small and medium-sized businesses that are antiquated in their marketing function and aren't. getting into this stuff, those are the brands that start a quote unquote podcast, because a podcast is relatively easy to start. Get 5 or 6 or 10 episodes in and don't see, to your point, a long-term future because of all of the different, pieces and parts that go into it. Get frustrated and stop. And so, no, I don't think all brands are media brands. Like we love the phrase, all brands are technology brands now because of how, businesses run. But I'm quadrupling down on the B2B brands that are taking this seriously as a core piece of their outreach, sales, community strategy. Those are the ones that are media brands, and those ones that are going to disproportionately win in a really fragmented tactical marketplace.
I like that. What you said was, no, all brands are not media brands.
They aren't.
But what I'm hearing from you is they probably should be, right?
Yeah.
There's a future looking aspect to this where there's lots of brands that are mostly in B2B relying on what I'd call traditional marketing tactics. And we can go into pamphlets and billboards, like real traditional B2B stuff, event marketing.
Creating a bunch of blog posts. Email's a very powerful tool, but so many are just using these singularly.
Right. But then there's the notion of traditional digital, right? Your SEO, your PPC, your programmatic or display advertising, you're even, getting down to your paid social is now starting to feel like a traditional commodity tactic. Yep. And to me, it's like brands that are reliant on old school tactics that aren't giving you much distribution or at least tracking attribution, I should say, or that are investing in channels that are kind of depreciating in value over time. Those are the ones who probably need to think about building a media brand. Okay, Jeff, I want to bring it to our next segment. We're going to do something that we like to call role play. Are you ready for a little
I forgot my wig, but yes.
All right. So, Jeff, here's what I'd like you to do. Whether it's a wig, whether it's a maid costume, whether you're putting on your He-Man outfit from when you were 6 years old, I want you to pretend, and let's bring you up here. Here we go. There's Jeff. Go ahead, get dressed.
These are my wife's glasses. It's going to hurt.
All right. Well, we'll squint. They look beautiful. I want you to pretend to be a B2B marketer. One that is relying on traditional marketing channels, like we mentioned, specifically traditional digital, PPC, SEO, paid social. We're sprinkling in event marketing. I want you to role play. You've been doing a podcast for a year now after relying on those traditional channels. What's the world look like for you, Jeff?
I mean, if I'm doing it well, the world looks like, I've got C-level buy-in. I'm doing it with consistency. I've got listenership. I'm starting to see some of those things come along. The organization's generally feeling good about it. We're investing in it, but maybe at some lower levels. And I think for a lot of people in this particular realm, that looks like success right now. That looks like success, although the market is hyper crowded. And so that success, to use your term, is depreciating. And while it might look good for some B2B brands, I think the returns on that are sliding, and they're starting to slide with more speed because the platforms that we use are starting to emphasize the things and continuing to emphasize the things that you just talked about: building community, engagement, frequency, multi or omni-channel in the content distribution. If I'm doing that, I'm saying we're doing really, really great, but I don't think a lot of people are doing that.
All right, Jeff, I want to wrap up our conversation about whether B2B podcasting works. So let's go here. We're going to go to our debate screen. Are you ready?
Ooh, this feels official.
Hey, look, we're like Squawk Box over here.
I thought we were doing PTI. You're Wilbon. I'm Kornheiser.
I'm definitely Tony. You're definitely Wilbon. Look at the haircuts. I'm losing my hair. You don't have any. It's perfect. Anyway, Jeff, here we go. Do B2B podcasts work? Let's hash it out here, because I am in the negative camp in the sense of audio B2B podcasts alone. I make them for people. They take a long time. And what you were saying before is, I've been doing this for a year and I've got executive buy-in and we're starting to get some traction. Excuse my language. I call bullshit. Jeff, that's not what's happening. I work with these people. They come to me and they're like, hey, we've been doing this podcast for a year. We've got 2,500 downloads in the year. We think our content's good. We're not really sure. We publish every 2 weeks and we're just not figuring out if it's working. People haven't figured out distribution. They don't understand the content cadence. They're frustrated.
Engagement.
It's too much work. Tell me why B2B podcasts are working.
So B2B podcasts are working for the most rudimentary level of feel-good romantic reasons. What you just said, people are listening, we're getting down, but they're small. You're not getting enough scale. So I think to the point that you're making is B2B podcast plus all of these other things where our audiences and our consumers for whatever our B2B company does are, even if it is not in their true, I'm at work LinkedIn form, that's where the success is going to come. That's where the next wave hits.
I love what you said. B2B podcast plus.
Yeah.
And if only there was a way to be able to brand that, which brings us to our second segment. What is a media brand? Dum, dum, dum. Took me a long time to figure out how to get the words over the faces. Anyway, Jeff, here we go. You and I have been working together for a little while, and I'm coming from this as a perspective of a B2B podcaster who's been doing the MarTech podcast specifically for 7 years.
And I want to raise my hand and say where I'm coming from to frame it, which is coming from agency world where you work with a lot of B2B brands who stick with stale and known tactics because they're comfortable.
Okay. Get out of here. We've been working on this for 7 years. We've built an audience. Like advertising on a show like the MarTech podcast or other shows that are established, have an audience and a following, makes a ton of sense. Building a B2B podcast from scratch, I don't think is enough alone. So we've been trying to figure out what is the marketing tactic and how do we package this up in a way that makes sense. And that's where this notion of media brands has come in. So we're going to move to our segment, which we call Talk Tagline. So Jeff, I'd like for you to help me here and let's define what the tagline is. Talk tagline to me and tell me what you consider to be a media brand.
So I consider a media brand to be content driven. It is distributed throughout multiple channels. It is continuously building a new audience. It's being marketed against to build that audience. It is constantly testing new distribution channels. It's live, it's video, it's audio, it's social shorts, and it is breaking all of those things apart, and it's always on. To your point from earlier, so many people, I launch every 2 weeks. Shouldn't that be enough? That's not how people consume content. And so a media brand to me, just like a brand is an aggregation of all of the touch points that a consumer has with your brand, B2B or B2C, this is what a media brand is. You are going into the places with frequency that your ICP or multiple ICPs are going to be, and you're consistently hitting them with content.
I'm doing this 2 weeks. Isn't that enough? I think that's really the key point here.
But you hear it all the time because it's really time consuming to do all the little pieces and parts.
Absolutely. The notion of this is how much time I have to dedicate and I want beautiful long form pieces of content and I want everybody to consume them. That's not what consumers do. Correct. We've seen the microfication, if you will, the chunking up of content, and people are looking at places like Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Everything is going shorter form, with the exception audio podcasts, I think you still get a fair amount of content. People do
Yeah.
go to YouTube and consume longer form content. I don't know if they're watching it. Hopefully, they're doing live streams as well. Jeff, we've had a lot of trouble defining this media brand. So I actually want to do a little experiment. Are you ready?
Let's go. I like it.
It's a live stream. What are you seeing?
I'm seeing ChatGPT, everybody's favorite assistant.
All right. For anybody listening on the podcasts, we are going to ChatGPT and asking for it to define what a media brand is. The prompt is, give me a 2-sentence description of a media brand. Enter. All right. GPT me. A media brand is a curated platform that creates, distributes, and amplifies content across various channels to engage a specific audience with compelling narratives, insights, or entertainment. It establishes a unique voice and identity, driving influence and loyalty through consistent messaging and value delivery.
So it's something that doesn't just talk about you. It talks about the problem, and it talks about the problem with multiple different voices in all the places that people consume stuff. GPT for the win.
Oh my God. Jeff,
Oh
we
my
made
God.
up the term media brand, and ChatGPT was like, oh, here's what you mean. It's wonderful.
Ben, you know what you're doing.
Description. Sam Altman, let me kiss the ring. I love talk tagline. This is wonderful. We're going to GPT everybody's taglines from now on.
Beautiful.
All right, Jeff, we've figured out what a media brand is. It is this thing that you are building. And honestly, you said podcast plus before. It starts in long form content, and you break it down to consistently provide value in an omni-channel fashion to your listeners wherever they are. But it is not just your brand.
Yeah.
It is not the I Hear Everything podcast in this example. It is the MarTech podcast, brought to you by I Hear Everything, right? It is a separate brand and entity that talks to your ICP. It is not just your brand. Jeff, am I getting this right?
Well, I think it's dead on. I constantly tell people, stop saying you need a podcast, because you don't need a podcast. You need a commitment from the organization to build a community around content, which is not new, but the nomenclature's new. And so everybody gets the idea in their head of Rogan, of Hoberman, of all of these huge shows, which are what? They're present everywhere. And sure, they might be B2C shows, but I think you're dead on in the fact that this is where things are going to the original question, where people succeed. The people who are going to succeed are going to commit to this as a voice for a community, not just a voice for their brand.
Hoberman? Do you mean Keith Olbermann or Huberman? It's Huberman.
Whatever.
Hoberman?
The guy with the beard and the whatever.
Let's move on to our next segment. We're going to go to double down or diversify. All right, Jeff, we did our role play before where you were pretending to be a B2B marketer in-house. You've got all of the budget. You're relying on PPC. You're relying on demand gen through a BDR and sales team. You're relying on SEO and your website to try to attract content.
Sounds about right.
And you're doing some paid ads every once in a while.
Ooh.
Should you be doubling down on that strategy right now, or should you be trying to diversify?
I think that the wishy-washy answer is it depends. I think what really good marketers and marketing teams are doing right now is they're taking a very dispassionate look at all of their tactics, which everybody should be doing every year. And you're sunsetting some things that are maybe ROI neutral, or things that, you're comfortable with, but really aren't driving anything. Now, if you have a tactic that's 200% ROI positive, I'm not leaving that. I'm not taking that off the table. This goes to something we talk about on CMO Confidential, which is sales overnight, brand over time. A marketing department wins when they prioritize the business goals, the sales, and they build that brand over time. This is a long-term effort. So the answer is I'm doubling down on certain things And I am starting to just because I'm politically adept and I'm taking both sides of the argument. But that's true because, and one more thing, we just used GPT. The search landscape is changing. You don't know what buying search words and what PPC and all of those things are going to look like. You don't know what the next channel from a social advertising perspective is going to look like. So everybody should be taking that 20% or 15% of test budget and starting to develop out what new things are working.
I'm going to get on my high horse here.
Ooh,
and
you're pretty tall.
You're hedging, and the game is double down or diversify, and you can't say depends. That's not how it works. You have to.
I didn't sign anything.
Oh, fine. Yes, you should double down on the things that work, and you should diversify away from the things that don't. I'm doubling down on content production right now. Yeah, I'm diversifying away from paid advertising. I'm also diversifying away from organic search. You hit the nail on the head. I don't know what's happening with Google. I think that ChatGPT, nobody really knows yet how to optimize for GPT. I think there is an existential threat to the Google landscape. I talk about it all the time on my SEO podcast, The Voices of Search. I am nervous about Google. For doing buy and sell. I'm a seller. But I do think that putting your content in places where your audience will listen, working with people that have audiences to build that word of mouth, that whole concept of dark social, whether it's your podcast, your YouTube, your short form, your clips, pushing yourself out there to try to grab attention and having that be what pulls people in to build influence, understanding. Like, to me, that's really the play. So with that said, Jeff, first off, anything you disagree?
No, I agree completely. And in fact, one of the things that we found in the CMO Confidential podcast, we started creating all this fabulous long form content and it wasn't getting picked up. It wasn't getting seen. You started doing shorts and then you started building an audience. You mentioned a word earlier, but to tag on to what you just said, consistency. It's not about consistency as a metric of every 2 weeks. It's about a consistency metric of daily.
The publishing schedule really matters. It does. Absolutely what B2B marketers don't understand.
Correct.
I want thoughtful white paper-esque content that I'm going to publish every 2 weeks, and it's going to be.
And then nobody looks at it.
Everyone's going to grab it, and it's like, all right, gray hairs.
Yeah.
Nobody wants your white papers, webinars. Come on. Who has the time?
Who has the time?
Kids to feed. All right, Jeff, I want to move on to our last segment. You ready for the big finish?
I am ready for the big finish. Do I have to do anything acrobatic?
Game plan. I'm really trying to ham it up here if you haven't got that. All right, Jeff, look, here we go. You're a B2B marketer. You're with traditional old school-ish tactics. You're not really sure what to do, how to make it work. You maybe tried a podcast. It didn't really go very well, but you could read the tea leaves. You could look into the crystal ball and see that the search landscape's changing. Advertising is getting more expensive.
Big time.
Give me the game plan.
So I think the game plan right now is create long form content, do it with consistency, build an audience, and then take that. I love the live stream piece of things because the live stream piece of things gives you immediacy. It also gives you engagement. It gives you feedback. I'm getting notes right now about this conversation. Taking it and then putting it into those places where people consume it on their own time frame, whether it is audio only, whether it is video in YouTube specifically. YouTube is doubling and tripling down on video first podcasts and also are creating audio versions of that themselves. And then their algorithm is saying, hey, we want you to chop this up and put it into shorts, and we want you to put it in an Instagram. We want you to put it in LinkedIn. The short form content, to your point before, I don't know if anybody saw this, but LinkedIn over the last 2 weeks has started to filter in shorts into their content. The only way you truly develop an audience that believes you and that gives you that metric that's most important, which is trust, is by seeing you all the time, seeing those little snippets where they go, ah, shit, yeah, that's it, I remember. And then they go down to your longer form content. So both pieces of it are necessary, but you really do have to frame it as, I am a media brand. I am publishing and distributing in these media outlets to gain any traction. And, are you going to get engagement on your audio? No, you're probably not, but you get it here. You get it in YouTube, you get it in LinkedIn. Start to go to those places where you can create those relationships, create that community, and then start to bring more people into it, talking about the ICP's problem, not talking about the company's benefit, but creating a community of people where they're talking about, man, I don't know how to give bad news, or I don't know how to structure a team that's going from, startup into private equity led, and start to break down those problems accordingly. And I mean, I honestly think this is the new form of content marketing that people who are going to win have to adopt, because otherwise you're going to continue seeing degradation in those channels that you hold so close.
It's the new form of marketing.
It's a new form of marketing.
And here's the thing: reach, frequency, depth of message. These are not new concepts. Be where your audience is.
Yep.
Be there consistently. Provide value to them. Now, the whole problem here, and the reason why this notion of media brands needs to exist, is that B2B marketers don't know how to take deep thought leadership content and break it down into consumable content that is meant to be distributed on primarily B2C marketing channels.
Correct.
How do I take my content and put it into something interesting, even on LinkedIn? What is interesting on LinkedIn? It is not, well, I mean, in fairness, we are 26 minutes into a live stream, but regular frequency, we would not do this every day.
Right.
But we might break this into, and hey, here's behind the curtain, take each one of these segments and break it into a shorter form video and republish it. And now we've got something to say for the week. You're seeing an example of how I think about media brands. You have your long form content. You can publish it all sorts of places. You could repackage it. You could strip the audio out. You can grab the best parts. You can put them in social. And then you can actually engage with your audience in the places where they're not just consuming your content, but they're also ready to have a conversation with you. People will raise their hand. You will understand who's interested, who's hearing your message, who are your best prospects and buyers. Jeff, last thing I want to ask you, anything you want to say, anything you want to promote, shout out before we let you go?
Man, go and subscribe to all of those CMO Confidential channels. We are, thing is growing like an absolute weed right now. And I think we exemplify kind of what this is. And also think about it as an ABM strategy. This is a great way to get prospects in a conversation, have a deep, thoughtful conversation with a broad group of people. And the bigger the show gets, the more you promote it, the more ease you will have in getting, those top tier prospects on the show, in order to have these kind of conversations. So CMO Confidential and B2B Brands, it's time to act like a media brand.
All right. Before we let you go, we have one comment I want to bring up. Our good friend Zach, and this is a little small on my screen, but says converting a B2B webinar into something that performs on YouTube is not for the faint of heart. Zach, congratulations on the new job. We hear you. You're right. The work that goes into repurposing content is something that is not for the faint of heart. It does take a lot of time and effort. Thank you for the comment. And on that note, that wraps up this episode of the Martech Podcast. Thank you for watching our live stream. If you are seeing this on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, any of the places, you can feel free to comment. If you're watching it after the fact, we will reply to your comments. They still come to us. So if you're not watching live, we will absolutely still continue the conversation with you. You can go to martechpod.com if you want to see the chunked up episodes and how we turn this into an audio only podcast, because they do still have some value. And also you can follow us on LinkedIn. I'm Benjamin Shapiro. Thank you for being our guest. And until next time, my advice, is to just focus on keeping your customers happy.